Hi, David Mould here, and I have a problem. I probably shouldn't be perturbed, but I am. As you'd expect, people subscribe and unsubscribe to our newsletters all the time. Thank God there are more who subscribe than those who don't. Lots more. But the other day, after writing this newsletter on your screen, somebody unsubscribed who used to be a donor here. Now I know things happen. People move, or lose a job, or get divorced, or for one reason or another just lose interest in what we're saying. But this time around, because of the horrific nature of what I had written, I felt sure I must have said something that offended him. As I pointed out at the very beginning of this newsletter, digging into history can be quite sobering. Sometimes you find things you just didn't expect. Take India, for example. How was I to know we'd actually find reference to a request for hundreds of prison cells to accommodate the accused in the 250-year Inquisition in the territory of Goa? One thing led to another, and wouldn't you know it, by the time I was through writing, the entire newsletter ended up being a treatise about the Vatican and her medieval torture chambers. Touchy subject, for sure. Yet how can we possibly teach the public about the beast and his mark without exhuming long-buried chapters of Vatican history? It is impossible. From the Waldenses in Europe to the Hindu and St. Thomas Christians in Goa, from the Ethiopians in East Africa to the attempt by the Pope to wipe out Queen Elizabeth I with the Spanish Armada, are not the global charges of Vatican bloodletting only too true? In the years of her supremacy, had not the Vatican slain millions of so-called heretics for no other reason than that they wouldn't become Catholics? What had I done wrong in resurrecting this? Absolutely nothing. Listen, my friends, if these scenes are to be repeated as the Bible tells us, then don't the masses need to know these things? Why then should I be criticized for plain speaking, for resurrecting verifiable, provable, documented history? Come, let's turn the page. Let's turn our eyes to America and her Constitution for a moment. The simple fact is that most of today's generation don't have a clue as to the battles that were fought and the lessons that were learned the hard way by those who fled to America and established the British colonies. I'm talking about the forefathers of men like Washington, Adams, Jefferson, and Madison. Now, the masses on a whole don't have a clue, for example, how the Establishment Clause made its way into the Constitution. They don't know why we have the First Amendment. The what clause, Brother Mould? Some of you might be saying. The Establishment Clause. What is that? What does it say? Let me put it up on your screen and read it for you. There it is. I don't need to look. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. That's what it says. Now, what does it mean? In this country, America, the founders wanted to ensure that there would be no repetition of the horrors of Europe and Great Britain. No repetition of the way things were done for centuries there, with the church controlling the state, with the inevitable consequence being the persecution of nonconformists. They wanted none of it. That was the intent of this sacred clause, and it was to rule in America. On page 296 of this book in my hands, Mrs. White describes the growth of this new nation, America, this way. The world marked with wonder the peace and prosperity of a church without a pope and a state without a king. That's Great Controversy, page 296. For over 1,000 years, the Church of Rome pretty much controlled politics in Europe. Then came the Protestant Reformation with Martin Luther's celebrated protest in Wittenberg, reverberating across the continent. Now let's be fair. When the Protestants came into power, many of them headed down the same road of intolerance too, in trying to compel people by law to worship only as they, Protestants, saw fit. Friend, when the pilgrims fled to America, they weren't fleeing Roman Catholicism so much as they were fleeing a Protestantism that was on its way to becoming just as intolerant. But the masses today don't know these things. Who's going to teach them? Who is going to teach them about the roots of the document that governs them? I'm referring to that very constitution hammered out in Philadelphia in 1787. Friend, I feel called to play my part. That's why I wrote that newsletter about the Vatican and her dungeons. That's why we pointed our audience back to old Faneuil Hall in Boston, where much of the discussions about this new country took place. With many today scrambling to make America Christian, somebody has to warn the masses about how far the forces of the church went in bygone days to seize and maintain power. Somebody has to teach them about words like Inquisition and Armada, and men like Sir Francis Walsingham over in England, whom we'll get to in a moment, and what he had to go through to keep the Queen of England safe from religious plotters who wanted nothing more than to kill her and return the country to Catholic rule. My friend, I'm not being biased. This is history. Unfortunate history, but history nonetheless. You can see it in the art of the day. In museums like the National Maritime Museum in London, with this fantastic painting of the Spanish Armada of 1588. Sent by the Pope, that Armada, and King Philip of Spain to return England to Catholic rule. The 150 ships and 18,000 men that made up the Armada is still here today in this painting in all its royal, glorious beauty. Well, I'm telling you, art teaches. It teaches often profound lessons about the past. Let me give you another example. Leaving England for the moment, let's run over to France. While you go to the largest art museum in the world, the Louvre, I'll head on over to the Roger Quillot Art Gallery in Clermont. Why? Because there we can still see the Queen Mother, France's Queen Mother, Catherine Medici, reviewing the corpses of Protestants slain in the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre in 1572. Friend, that's some 70,000 people slaughtered for no other reason than that the masses were told they were heretics. They wouldn't become Catholic and they were slaughtered. I'm telling you, you can get a sense of the exquisitely rich history of church-state relations in art galleries like these, or you can read it in encyclopedias to this day. This history is not hidden. It's there for you to ponder if you know where to look. So no, I'm not sorry I wrote that newsletter, regardless of who it offended. Some may wish for a mamby-pamby Christianity where people stick their heads in the sand and pretend these things didn't happen. But I insist I did no wrong in resurrecting this history, however politically incorrect it may have been. We're heading towards the rapids, beloved. You can hear that? And I should remain silent? God forbid. There's a time for silence and there's a time to shout. It's shouting time now, my friend. If the Bible is to be believed, there's a planet to be warned about the mark of the beast and the bloodletting that is just ahead. Now let's get into a little bit of history. The history of this man whom we mentioned, Sir Francis Walsingham. Who was he? Not only was he Queen Elizabeth's spy master, it was in part his resolute defense of his queen and nation that led to the formation of England's MI5, which for those of us who don't know, that's the equivalent of America's FBI. You heard me correctly. While the Queen was being kept safe within the embrace of her security entourage, plot after plot to destroy her was being uncovered at the same time by this man, Walsingham, about whom the more I read, the more I admire. Here's what Encyclopedia Britannica has to say about him. You can look it up yourself. Go online. Born 1532, Kent, England. Died April 6, 1590 in London. English statesman and diplomat who was the principal secretary 1573 to 1590 to Queen Elizabeth I and became legendary for creating a highly effective intelligence network. He successfully thwarted England's foreign enemies and exposed domestic plotters who sought to unseat Elizabeth and return a Roman Catholic monarch to the throne. Anticipating methods that would become routine only centuries later in the world's intelligence services, Walsingham employed double agents, covert propaganda and disinformation, code breaking, and agents provocateurs to advance English interests. His efforts culminated in the execution of Mary Queen of Scots in 1587. Is Britannica lying? Were the Ridolfi, Throckmorton and Babington plots to kill Queen Elizabeth and to put a Catholic on the throne of England all mirages? No, Britannica wasn't lying. These plots actually took place. The tragedy though is this: with the dumbing down of much of this planet, a stark reality, most people on the streets, whether it be in France, America, or even England, most people have never so much as heard the name Walsingham. While reviewing script a few weeks ago for part 15 of our video series, Finding America in Bible Prophecy, I felt the need to introduce him to our audience and to get some shots of his grave. A picture is still worth 1,000 words, isn't it? Unlike other shots in our documentary series which require me to go to various locations personally, I didn't have to stand on the spot where Sir Francis was laid to rest. Someone else could do it and did. All I needed were the photographs and good video. With that in mind, we recently asked our producer over in England to find Sir Francis's resting place at St. Paul's Cathedral in London and take a few shots for me. What we received a few days later were 131 photographs and 23 videos. These were beautiful shots, gorgeous shots, shots taken on the outside of this imposing cathedral and also on the inside, where we hoped to find the marker of Sir Francis's grave. It turned out that upon his death in 1590, Sir Francis Walsingham was buried in the original Cathedral of St. Paul, which was destroyed in the Great Fire of London in 1666. So if we couldn't find a grave, we could at least find a marker. That's what we thought. That turned out to be much easier said than done. Our producer had to hunt for it. In the end, you know where we found it? It was found in the dimly lit basement in an area called the Crypt, right next to a cafeteria. When found, there was only one sentence on the marker to summarize the history of this right-hand man to Queen Elizabeth, whom she referred to as his Moor because of his dark complexion. Unlike Nelson's column in Trafalgar Square, which commemorates Vice Admiral Horatio Nelson's decisive victory at the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805, we could find no memorial for Sir Francis Walsingham, this hero. Such a pity. Why such obscurity even at St. Paul's though? I'll tell you what my producer said. Kind of muttered it to me, said this place must be run by the Jesuits. I'm sorry, but that's what he said. This place must be run by the Jesuits, meaning they would have an interest in keeping Walsingham obscure, out of the public eye. Friend, if we're ever to enlighten the masses of humanity as to the prophecies of Daniel 7 and Revelation 13, where the mark of the beast is found, good, professionally shot video has to be procured from several locations too. Like it or not, this is a visual age. Unlike Ellen White's day, where people got their news from books or newspapers, according to the Pew Foundation, more than 8 in 10 United States adults, that's 86%, say they get their news from a smartphone, computer, or tablet. That's significantly more than they get from any other source. As a church, we've simply got to rethink our approach to the masses. How do we draw them? How and what do we teach? To my mind, Sir Francis Walsingham's history is a key educational tool. That's why we had to film at St. Paul's. No doubt, people like him are part of the reason also why Mrs. White wrote, "Educate, educate, educate." That's from the 6th volume of the Testimonies, page 416. Yeah, we've got a world to reach and to teach in a very short time. In addition to the lessons left us by Sir Francis, that's what I prefer to call him, I'd like to visit the museums and libraries of India as well, where good, solid, verifiable history about the Goa Inquisition and its prison cells can be found. I'd also like to take our cameras to Ethiopia, about which Mrs. White had this to say in this book, The Great Controversy. The history of the churches of Ethiopia and Abyssinia is especially significant. Amid the gloom of the Dark Ages, the Christians of Central Africa were lost sight of and forgotten by the world. And for many centuries they enjoyed freedom in the exercise of their faith. But at last Rome learned of their existence, and the Emperor of Abyssinia was soon beguiled into an acknowledgement of the Pope as the Vicar of Christ. Other concessions followed. An edict was issued forbidding the observance of the Sabbath under the severest penalties. See Michael Geddes' Church History of Ethiopia, pages 311 and 312. But papal tyranny soon became a yoke so galling that the Abyssinians determined to break it from their necks. After a terrible struggle, the Romanists were banished from their dominions, and the ancient faith was restored. The churches rejoiced in their freedom, and they never forgot the lesson they had learned concerning the deception, the fanaticism, and the despotic power of Rome. Within their solitary realm, they were content to remain unknown to the rest of Christendom. That's Great Controversy, page 577. Beyond these, there are at least 30 destinations begging to be filmed right now, among them places in Turkey, Egypt, Israel, and a host of others. Our prayer is that we might raise $300,000 at least to cover travel and filming to these countries. Some places like Italy have multiple locations that are part of our script. One country with maybe 15 different stops. But places like Tunisia, where the Vandals were overthrown, have just one stop, and that's ancient Carthage. Taken all together, these locations will help us to produce our 2 remaining legacy videos, Kurosh the Great and the Prophecy of Daniel 9:25, and Finding America in Bible Prophecy. This latter one is largely a commentary on the prophecy of Daniel 7 verses 24 and 25, which is so essential if we're to convince thinking people about the identities of the two beasts that show up in Revelation 13. Gotta go back to Daniel first. That's where it's established. I confess there's some personal ambition here on my part. Yes, because written on my heart is the challenge of emulating the legacy of this man on your screen, William Miller. Of him we read in The Great Controversy, a class of minds are reached by him, not within the influence of other men. That's on page 331. Friend, that's what I feel called to do, to reach the seemingly unreachable, even atheists. That's what wakes me up at night and drives me to my computer, there to sit for hours writing script or researching books like these. Let me show you which one I mean. Books like this one. Books about the Inquisition, all right? I can't begin to tell you what is in here, but I'm not ready to go public just yet. You let me continue researching and digging. But it's going to take good, solid research to reach that class of mind. Research such as we have displayed in that newsletter on your screen, and incisive, adventurous video to pull it off. Yes, America is in the Bible, and I'd like to be able to take our cameras wherever the script calls for us to go if we were to prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt. Nothing on this scale within the church that I'm a part of, at any rate, has ever been attempted before. And we don't have much time in which to do it either. If you like what we just shot and shared with you about today's hero, Sir Francis Walsingham, who shows up in episode 16 of our series, by the way, then you'll absolutely love the personalities we haven't yet disclosed as we march forward with our series. Friend, we've been filming for almost 3 years. 3 tiring years. But it's been pretty much exclusively in the studio. Now it's time to go in the field with our cameras. Won't you help us? Who knows when the next pandemic will hit and shut down all our travel plans? If you got resources that you're not using, please send them our way. Now, today. If you're in America, you'll get a tax-deductible receipt for every dime you send. Regardless of where you are or where you live, you can also get 1 or 2 other perks, like this one. For those who send $100 or more, for example, we'll send you our original Time magazine ad, not just the ad, but the magazine itself, dated July 9th, 1990. We've held these for 30 years, 33 years. You'll get a copy of this magazine. We've got a few hundred still in storage. That's another story all by itself. For those who send less than $100, we've got this booklet, My Trip to Iran. But please, whatever you're doing, do it quickly, please. I'm not taking tomorrow for granted. I'd like to start booking those flights immediately. Well, my friend, having introduced you to our latest hero, I think it's time to bring this little chat to a close. I am convinced Sir Francis Walsingham deserves to be much more widely known than he is. So do many of the people from Egypt to Japan who also feature in our documentary series. They too, and the roles they played in shaping history, need to be known. Won't you partner with us as we attempt to bring them before the world? That's my request. May God richly bless you as we go forward this morning. That's my prayer. He who hath ears to hear, let him hear. Amen.